The lock had not passed a boat in 40 years, but the gates still held water on the upstream side, and at 2 in the morning, Dale Corver stood on the concrete apron with a flashlight in his teeth and tried to understand why the heron was gone. He had counted on the heron the way he counted on the river. It roosted in the dead sycamore above the lower miter gate every night, from April to October, a gray shape folded against the bark, and it had been there at 11 when he made his first pass. Now the branch was empty. Not flown to a closer perch, not down at the water hunting. Gone and away, the river itself had gone quiet around, the frogs along the tail race stopped, the insects in the willows stopped, the whole bottomland holding still, the way a room holds still when someone has just left it. Dale took the light out of his teeth and pointed it at the branch, and then at the mud below it, and stood there longer than the cold justified. He was 61, and he had worked water his whole life. 22 years on the lower river running a towboat deckhand crew, then the back injury, then the slow down shift into a job that suited a man who liked to be alone and didn't mind a radio that never crackled. He was the night caretaker for the old canal lock and the small county park built around it, a place nobody visited after dark and few enough visited in daylight. He walked the apron, checked the seep weirs, read the staff gauge, logged the upstream pool elevation in a waterproof notebook he kept in his coat, and called nothing in unless something was wrong. Most nights, nothing was wrong. He liked it that way. He did not exaggerate, did not invent, and did not call the county to report a missing bird. The job had a rhythm, and he had learned the rhythm the way he'd learned the river, by doing it 10,000 times until his body did it without him. First, the truck up the gravel from the house, headlights swinging across the same 3 deer that fed the same clearing every night. Then the lower gate, where he put his palm flat to the steel and felt the cold of it and the faint live tremor of water working through the seal. Then the staff gauge, the numbers painted on the concrete down at the water line, read by flashlight and set down in the notebook to the 1/4 foot. Then the weirs, 3 of them where the leakage came through and ran off in controlled little streams he kept clear of leaves and mud. Because a clogged weir backed water into the bank, and a backed bank was how 180 years of this lock finally gave out on his watch, and it was not going to give out on his watch. He took a quiet pride in that nobody would ever know he had taken. The river stayed where it belonged, and the houses downstream slept dry, and none of those people had ever heard his name, and that was the whole of the arrangement, and it suited him. He knew the bottomland by its sound more than its look, because most of his hours in it were dark hours. He knew the spring chorus of the frogs and the way it thinned toward fall. He knew the barred owls that called across the channel in the early dark, and the screech owl that lived in the box he'd nailed up himself on the gatehouse wall. He knew the heron's slow, heavy wing beat when it shifted on the roost, and the splash when it took a frog, and the low rasp it made at things that came too near the tree. The heron was the closest thing he had to company out there besides the dog, and he'd never have said so out loud, and he'd noted its absence on the page the way he noted the pool elevation, because the page took everything plain and asked no questions. But he wrote the time down. He always wrote the time down. 2:11. Heron, absent. He clicked the pen and put it away and told himself an owl had moved through and scattered the roost. And the explanation was already thin in his own mouth, because an owl would have set the frogs off, not silenced them. His wife had been dead 3 years that spring. Marlene. He still set 2 cups out some mornings before he caught himself, and the catching was worse than the forgetting. They'd had no children, only the dog, a black and tan coonhound named Biscuit, who was 12 now, and stiffened the hips and rode the night rounds in the bed of the truck, because she could no longer make the jump on her own. She had not barked at the heron's branch. That was the thing he came back to later. Biscuit, who bayed at deer and possums in the wind in the wrong direction, had stood in the truck bed with her nose working and her whole body low, and had made no sound at all. He finished the round on foot because the truck couldn't follow the towpath. Down past the lower gate, across the old wooden footbridge that spanned the bypass channel, out to the turning basin where the canal had once widened to let boats come about. The basin was silted in. Now a half-acre of cattail and black water, and the towpath ran along its edge on a built-up bank of cut stone the canal company had laid in the 1840s. He knew the stones. He knew which ones rocked under a boot. He walked it slow with the light low, because that was how you kept your feet on wet stone. And that was how the light caught the track. It sat in the soft ground at the edge of the towpath where the stone gave way to mud. And at first he read it as a bear, because a bear was the only thing in southern Ohio that left a print that size. And there had been bear sign in the county the last few years, young males pushing in from the east. He crouched. He put the light flat across it the way you read a track, raking the beams so the ridges threw shadow. It was not a bear. A bear walks on the whole flat of its foot and leaves a track like a man's bare heel with toes above it. This was longer than it was wide, and the toes were too long, and there were 4 of them set forward, and a 5th set back and lower, and at the front of each toe, the mud was punched deeper where the claw had carried the weight. The whole impression was better than 11 inches heel to claw. He laid his own boot beside it, a size 11, and the track ran past his toe by 3 fingers. He did not photograph it. His phone was in the truck, and the truck was a quarter-mile back, and he was not going to leave the track to go get it. He took the notebook out instead and drew it, the way his father had taught him to draw a track when he was a boy. The outline first, and then the measurements written in along the edges. 11 1/4 long. 6 1/2 across the toes. Stride to the next clear print, when he found it 51 inches, which was not a stride, which was a bound, and a bound on 2 legs, because there was no second pair of prints offset behind the first. 2 feet, one in front of the other, walking the towpath the way he walked it, on the same stones, in the same direction. Ahead of him in the dark, Dale was not a man who frightened easy, and he did not frighten then. He felt instead the thing he'd felt twice in his life on the water. Once when a barge cable parted under load, and once when the river took a man off the deck in front of him, a flat cold dropping in the chest that was not panic, but the body clearing the decks for whatever came next. He stood up slow. He turned the light off. He listened. The basin gave him nothing. No frog, no insect, no heron. Only the small, constant talk of water moving through the weir at the far end. And under that, once, a sound he could not place and did not like. A low sound. Not a growl exactly. More like the river itself had cleared its throat a quarter-mile downstream, a bass note with a faster rattle riding inside it, there and then not there. And the not there was worse because it meant the thing had stopped making it on purpose. He walked back to the truck without hurrying and without turning the light back on, and Biscuit was pressed flat to the truck bed with her chin down between her paws. She did not lift her head until his hand was on the rail. And when she did, her eyes found him first and then went past him into the dark over his shoulder. He lifted her down. She would not get out from under the truck. He had to reach in and pull her by the collar, and she came stiff-legged and unwilling and shaking, an old dog who had treed 100 coons and feared none of them, shaking like a pup in a thunderstorm. And Dale put her in the cab beside him, and drove the gravel back to the caretaker's house with both hands on the wheel and the heater running, and said nothing because there was nothing to say to a dog. He logged it in the morning. Heron absent. Large track, towpath, lower basin, bipedal, 11 1/4 inches. He wrote it plain, because that was how he wrote everything. And reading it back, it looked exactly like the kind of report he'd have rolled his eyes at from anyone else. And that bothered him more than the track had. He'd spent his life trusting the page. If the page said a thing, the thing was so. Now the page said something he could not square, and he was the one who'd written it. He told himself he would watch for it and not chase it. That was the plan. And it was a good plan, and it lasted 4 days. The seep weirs were the reason it could not last. A lock that old leaked, and the county's whole arrangement with the state depended on Dale keeping the leakage logged and the weirs clear, because if the upstream pool dropped, the canal bank could slump, and the towpath with it. And there were people downstream in the floodplain who did not know. Their houses sat where they sat because 180 years of caretakers had kept the water where it belonged. So he could not simply stay in the house. He had a round to walk, and the round went past the basin, and the basin was where the sign was. And so on the second night, and the third he walked it. The second night, the track was there again, fresher, the mud still holding water in the claw punches, and beside the first there was a second and a third laid out along the towpath in that same long bounding rhythm, 50 inches and better between them. And he followed them with the light low until they turned off the path and down into the cattails at the basin edge, and the ground got too soft to read. He stood at the place where they went into the water, and he made himself think it through the way he'd think through a fault on a winch. A man could fake a track. Kids did it, with carved boards on ropes. But kids did not fake a track at 2 a.m, a quarter mile from the nearest road on stones that rocked under your feet. And kids did not silence the frogs, and kids did not put the heron off its roost. And when he'd run the explanation all the way out, the way he ran a cable out to check it for kinks, it came back to him frayed and useless. And he clicked the pen and wrote down what was there and not what he wished was there. That was the discipline. The page took what was there. The third night, it was not on the towpath at all. It was on the apron of the lock, on the concrete, and a smear of river mud that had been carried up out of the channel and printed dry on the dam where no animal had business, being 40 feet from the door of the little stone gatehouse where the old machinery still sat. That was the night the explanations started failing faster than he could build them, he told himself. The first night, bear. He told himself the second that he'd misjudged the stride in the dark, that 2 prints he'd read as one animal were 2 animals, a sow and a cub. The mud on the apron killed both. Nothing he could name climbed 40 feet of riprap and crossed dry concrete to stand at a locked steel door and leave a hand. Because it was a hand, he saw it clearly under the gatehouse light. The print where the thing had braced itself against the door frame, 4 long fingers and a thumb set lower and wider than a thumb should sit. The fingers ending in the same deep claw punch he'd measured on the towpath, the whole spread of it wider than both his hands laid side by side. He held his own hand up against it in the light, not touching, just measuring. And his fingers reached barely past the second knuckle of the print, and he was not a small-handed man. It had stood at the door. It had put its weight on the frame and looked at the door, or through the small wired glass window in the door, into the dark room where the lock machinery was. And then it had gone back down to the river and left him the print to find. Dale called the county the next morning. He did it because it was the correct thing to do, and he had spent his life doing the correct thing. And he knew, while he dialed, that it would come to nothing. He got the daytime park supervisor, a decent man named Pruitt, who had never once been to the loch at night. "It's Corver out at the canal loch," he said. "I've got tracks out here I want, on the record. Something big working the towpath. 3 nights running now came up on the apron last night. Right to the gatehouse door." There was the sound of Pruitt settling back in a chair. The small creak of a man who is not going to come look. "Big how, bear big. Bigger than that, and walking on 2. On 2? A pause, Dale? You know we got bears in the county now. Young males pushing in. They'll rear up, you know, stand up to look at a thing. Throws people off. I know what a bear does. This isn't that." He gave the measurements then, flat, the way he'd give a gauge reading. 11 1/4 heel to claw, 6 1/2 across, stride better than 4 feet, no offset for a second set of feet. He heard Pruitt writing some of it down, and not all of it. "I'll pass it up," Pruitt said finally. "Get an officer out when I can. We're short. You know how it is. Might be a week, maybe 2. In the meantime, keep them gates locked and don't go near it if you see it. Don't be a hero out there for a part-time check." "I won't go near it," Dale said, and meant it, and hung up. He stood in the kitchen with the phone in his hand and understood that he was on his own out there, that he had been on his own for 3 years and was simply now more on his own, and that the help that existed on paper would arrive, if it arrived at all, after whatever was going to happen had already happened. He started carrying the shotgun on the round, an old pump gun, his father's, that he'd kept clean out of habit, and fired maybe twice a decade at a groundhog in the garden. He loaded it with slugs, because birdshot was for birds, and whatever was walking the towpath was not a bird, and he felt foolish doing it and did it anyway, and the foolishness lasted exactly until the 4th night, when the thing let him hear it up close for the first time. He was at the turning basin. He had stopped reading the staff gauge and gone still because Biscuit, who he no longer left in the truck, who he now kept on a lead at his side, had stopped walking and locked her legs and would not be pulled forward. He'd felt the lead go tight and looked down and seen her down in a crouch with her belly nearly to the stone, her lips working but no sound coming, all the bay gone out of her, and only the want to bay left. And he'd learned by then to read her like he read the river, and what she read in the dark across the water was enough that he brought the gun up off its sling and thumbed the safety. The basin was full dark. The weir talked at the far end. And then from across the black water, from the cattails on the far bank, not 70 feet off, the sound came, and it was the sound he'd half heard the first night, brought close and given a body. A low, rolling bass that he felt in the sternum before he heard it in the ear, and inside it, riding on top of it, a faster dry chatter, like a heavy man clearing phlegm, like 2 voices working out of one chest, one of them deep and slow and the other quick and broken, and the 2 of them braided together in a way no throat he knew of was built to make. It went on longer than an animal sound should. It did not rise into a howl or break into a bark. It stayed level and close and aware, and Dale understood, standing on the cut stone in the dark, with his father's gun in his hands, and his dying dog pressed against his leg, that the thing was not calling out. It knew exactly where he was. It was letting him know it knew. He did not run. Running on those stones in the dark was how a man broke a leg, and a broken leg, out there was a death sentence with or without the thing across the water. He backed. He kept the light off because the light made him a target and gave him nothing in return. And he backed down the towpath, one sure stone at a time, with the dog moving with him low and silent. And the sound followed him, not the thing, the sound, moving along the far bank in parallel, keeping level with him, until the basin narrowed toward the footbridge, and the far bank pinched in, and the thing would have to either show itself at the bridge or fall back. It fell back. The sound stopped at the water's edge where the channels met. Dale crossed the footbridge, with his back crawling and his thumb on the safety, and made the truck, and got the dog up into the cab and sat there a long while before his hands were steady enough to turn the key. That was when he stopped calling it the Round and started calling it, in the privacy of his own head, the Watch, because that was what it had become. He was not maintaining a lock anymore. And he was standing a watch against something that had decided the lock was its territory, or his presence was, and that was working closer along a line only it understood, from the towpath to the apron to the door, and the next address on that line was the gatehouse itself. And after the gatehouse, the caretaker's house where the lights were on, and the old dog slept, and Dale sat up nights now with the shotgun across his knees. He tried those next days to be the man he had always been about it. He measured. He catalogued. He laid a band of lime along the apron one evening, a white powder line, 18 inches wide from the riprap to the gatehouse door, the way you dust a floor, to read what crossed it, working it down out of a feed sack, with a steady arm in the last of the light, and he stood back and looked at it and felt the small satisfaction of a clean piece of work. A trap that was not a trap, but a question laid down in powder. In the morning the line was broken in 2 places by prints that ran straight to the door and stopped and turned and ran back. And the turning was the part he could not get past. An animal crosses a thing. It does not come to a door, consider the door, and go back to the water. He crouched over the prints in the lime and measured them. 11 1/4 the same. He measured the distance between the in-track and the out-track at the door, and it was 8 inches, which meant the thing had stood at the door with its feet together, facing it. The way a man stands at a door he is thinking about opening. He looked a long time at the wire glass window in the door, at the dark room beyond it where the lock machinery sat under its grease and tarps. And he could not shake the sense that the thing had stood where he was crouching and looked through that same glass, into that same dark, and had wanted in. He found the heron on the 7th day, or what the heron had become, which was a scatter of gray feathers and the long yellow bones of the legs at the foot of the dead sycamore. The bones were clean, the feathers were dry. There was no blood and no torn flesh, and no sign of struggle, only the bird taken apart and set down, the long legs laid more or less parallel, the way a man might set a tool down when he's done with it. Dale stood over it and did not touch it. He had skinned and dressed game his whole life, and he knew what a kill looked like, and a kill did not look like this. A fox scattered a bird. A hawk left the breastbone stripped, and the wing feathers chewed at the quills. This looked like something had eaten what it wanted with patience, and arranged the rest, and the arranging was a kind of message in a language he refused to let himself read, and he turned and walked back to the house and got the camera and came back and photographed the bones from 4 angles, because if he was going to lose his mind out here, he was at least going to keep a record of the losing. He put the photographs on the page beside the track drawings. The page was filling up. None of it added to anything a reasonable man could carry to another reasonable man. And all of it was true, and he had measured every inch of it himself. The wildlife officer came on the 9th day, in daylight, which was the only time the help ever came. A young man named Sankey, polite, tired, with a department truck and a clipboard, and the patient face of a man who had driven a long way to look at a bear that wasn't going to be there. Dale walked him out to the apron and showed him the lime line, mostly weathered now, and the dried prints on the concrete, and Sankey crouched over them the way Dale had crouched, raked his own light across them, and was quiet for a while in a way Dale had not expected. He'd expected the bear speech. Sankey did not give the bear speech. He measured the prints with the tape off his belt, and wrote the numbers down, and pressed his thumb into one of the claw punches. "You drew these," he said, looking at the notebook Dale held out. It was not quite a question. "Night I found them, before they dried." Sankey turned the page. "Look at the heron photographs." Turned back. He went up the Ruppert a little way, and looked at the river running gray below the lock, and came back down and stood there a while longer than a tired man stands at the end of a long drive. "I'll be straight with you," he said. "It isn't bear. Don't walk a line like that. Don't have that hand. It isn't cat. It isn't dog. It isn't anything I've got a card for." He tapped the clipboard against his leg. "The stride's wrong for everything I know. I'll take the numbers back. I'll ask the older guys. Somebody might have seen something like it." He didn't laugh. He didn't say the word anyone might have said. "You out here every night by yourself." Sankey nodded slow, like that confirmed something he'd rather not have confirmed. "I'd think hard about that," he said. "For a part-time check, I'd think hard about being the only thing out here in the dark with whatever's leaving these." He shook Dale's hand. He looked once more up the river before he got in his truck. A quick, involuntary look, the look of a man checking a door he's already decided is locked, and he drove off, and Dale never heard from him again. He'd learn later the measurements went into a file, and the file went nowhere because there was no box on any form for what they described. And a thing with no box does not exist to the people who live by forms. The 10th night it came up the gravel. Dale knew it was coming up the gravel because Biscuit knew. The dog had not slept right in a week, and Dale had not either, and they were both in the front room with the lamp on, Dale in the chair by the window with the gun, and the dog at his feet with her ears, just up on her feet with her hackles, standing in a ridge from her neck to her tail, and her whole body pointed at the door. Dale turned off the lamp. He sat in the dark and listened, and after a minute he heard it, the slow crunch of the gravel out beyond the porch, unhurried, heavy, a weight coming up the lane in no rush at all, stopping, starting, the way a man walks when he is reading the ground as he comes. He knew that lane in his sleep. He knew it was 110 feet from the porch, step to the cattle gate at the end of it, because he'd paced it off chaining the gate one winter and he tracked the thing's progress up it, by the gravel alone, by the patient placement of each heavy foot, and it took its time the way nothing hunting takes its time. The way only a thing that has already decided it cannot be stopped takes its time. It came to the edge of where the porch light reached, and it stopped there, just outside the light. And Dale could not see it, and knew it was there the way you know a truck is parked behind you in the dark, by the shape of the silence it makes. He did not turn on the porch light. He understood, sitting there, that the light was what it wanted, that it had walked into the edge of the light and stopped because it was waiting for him to do the one thing a frightened man does, which is throw light at the dark to see what's in it. And that the moment the porch lit up, he would be standing at a window in a bright room, looking out at a thing that had spent 10 days learning him, and it would have him fixed and lit and known, and he would have one glimpse before whatever came after the glimpse. So he did not turn on the light. He sat in the dark, with the dark thing 40 feet away, and he did the hardest thing he had done since they put Marlene in the ground, which was nothing. He let it stand there. And after a while, a long while, the gravel crunched again, slow, retreating, the weight going back down the lane toward the river, the way it had come. and somewhere down past the trees the bass sound rolled once across the bottomland. The braided two-throated note, level. And then the night was only a night again, and the dog lay down and shook against his boots until dawn. Dawn proved nothing. That was the thing about the dawns out there. What a kime. The light came up gray through the sycamores, and the river ran the color of pewter, and the bottomland filled with birdsong, as if no silence had ever owned it, and Dale walked the lane in the wet morning, and found the prince in the gravel where it had stood at the edge of the light, the two of them side by side, facing the house. And a third, a long stride back where it had turned, and he stood in his own front yard and looked at the place a thing had stood, and watched him through his own window and felt the cold drop in his chest that the body keeps for the times the mind can't catch up. The dawn had not saved him. The dawn had only taken the dark away and left the prince, and the prince were worse in daylight, because daylight was supposed to be the time the night things weren't real, and these were. He thought about leaving. He sat at the kitchen table that morning with the cold coffee and Marlene's empty cup that he'd set out again from habit, and he turned the cup slow in his hands, and he thought about packing the truck and the dog and driving to his sister's in Chillicothe. And he could have. There was